Hey guys, tonight, we're going somewhere you probably wouldn't choose if given a list of all the places in history you could spend the night. Versailles, yes, but not the Versailles of champagne fountains and powdered wigs. Tonight it's twilight and the sun is retreating behind the gardens, like it knows better than to hang around for what's coming. The light falls in soft layers over marble terraces, catching on gold leaf that's already losing its shine. And you're here, just in time to see the very end of a world. You probably won't survive this, at least not if you're the one wearing the crown. The air carries the faint perfume of roses, but it's tangled now with something sour, something metallic, like the first whisper of rust on the palace gates. Versailles is still beautiful, achingly so, but it's the kind of beauty you sense might break if you breathe too hard. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is there. I love knowing just how far this little circle of candlelight reaches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on the marble steps of the south wing, the sky above, brushed in pale lavender, as if the heavens themselves have gone quiet in anticipation. The gardens are nearly empty, an unusual sight here. Only a few gardeners linger, stooping over hedges, their movements slow and deliberate, as if trying to finish a lifetime's work before the night closes in. You notice one of them glancing up toward the palace windows, not the grand hall of mirrors, but the smaller, less gilded panes in the east wing. That's where she is. The palace itself exhales the day. Sunlight seeps from its hundreds of windows, and the shadows deepen in the colonnades. The air is warm, almost sticky, clinging to your skin, the way powdered sugar sticks to fingertips, pleasant but faintly oppressive. You hear the faint crunch of carriage wheels somewhere beyond the outer gates, followed by the unmistakable snap of hooves on stone. In another life, that might have been the sound of visitors arriving for a ball. Tonight it feels more like the last guests slipping in before the doors are locked. A courtier passes you his coat, slightly frayed at the cuffs. Something unthinkable here a decade ago. He doesn't notice you, his gaze fixed on the gravel path ahead. There's a murmur in the air now, a layering of voices carried from unseen rooms. They blend with the rustle of the trees and the lazy drip of the fountains, forming a strange, uneasy lullaby. Historians still argue whether this twilight was truly different from any other, whether the mood was tangible or if we've only painted it so in hindsight. But standing here, you'd swear even the statues are leaning forward to listen. You wander toward the orangerie, its massive arched windows reflecting the last streaks of pink in the sky. Inside, the orange trees rest in their neat wooden boxes, each one a prisoner of symmetry. Their scent is faint but sharp, like the ghost of summer. Beyond them, the lawn stretches wide and silent, ending at a stone balustrade that overlooks the lower gardens. From here, you can see the Grand Canal, a silver ribbon in the distance, catching the last of the sun like a blade. A breeze drifts up from the water, carrying with it the mingled scents of damp earth and cut grass. Somewhere in that breeze, faint but insistent, is the sound of Paris, a low, restless murmur, as if the city is pacing in its sleep. You turn back toward the palace just in time to see a shutter close in one of the upstairs windows. For a moment you imagine her there, peering out, Marie Antoinette, framed by fading daylight, her eyes tracing the horizon where the sun disappears. She once ruled these gardens like a private stage. Now she's watching them from behind the velvet curtain, waiting for an audience she never wanted. A palace servant crosses the terrace, balancing a silver tray that catches the last of the sun like a signal mirror. On it, a single glass of water and a small plate, no feast, no pastries, just the plain necessities. It's a quiet fact of the night the kitchens of Versailles no longer send up banquets to its queen. You walk along the facade feeling the way the stone still radiates heat from the day. It's smooth beneath your fingertips, almost warm enough to be alive. This building has seen monarchs rise and fall, revolutions whispered and shouted, but it remains unmoved, at least on the outside. In the corner of your vision, you catch a flicker of movement, a pair of guards at the edge of the terrace. Their uniforms are neat but dusty, their expressions unreadable. You wonder if they're here to protect her, or to make sure she never leaves. The sun finally slips away, and the gardens are swallowed in shadow. Candles bloom in the windows, flickering like cautious stars. Somewhere deep inside the palace, a clock chimes its sound, soft yet absolute. The hour has shifted, the day is over, and the night, with all its unspoken promises, has begun. You step back inside, and the shift is immediate. Versailles in daylight is a palace. Versailles at night is a labyrinth. The corridors feel longer, their gilded panels and damask walls swallowing up the sound of your footsteps. Every flickering candle throws shadows that seem to move before you do, stretching across marble floors like hesitant dancers. The air inside is warm, but close perfumed faintly with beeswax from the candles, and a powdery sweetness left behind by decades of cosmetics, hair pomade, and pressed flowers. You remember reading somewhere that the palace walls, quite literally, have absorbed centuries of perfume and of smoke and of whispered secrets. You follow a faint sound cloth rustling like skirts brushing past the wall just ahead. The light pools in patches here, leaving pockets of darkness where your imagination wanders. Around one corner, you spot a chambermaid, her head bowed, hands clasped behind her back. She walks quickly, avoiding eye contact, as though even glancing upward might be considered treason now. Her footsteps echo, then vanish into one of the endless side passages. Everywhere you go, the voices are different from the Versailles you know. Not the lilting, sugary chatter of courtiers eager to be overheard, but hushed exchanges that die mid-sentence if another person passes. You hear fragments tomorrow. No, they say, and the streets are never quite enough to form the whole story. Historians still argue whether the palace was truly aware of what was about to happen that night, or whether most people here clung to denial until the very end. The gallery ahead opens into the Hall of Mirrors. Even now, without the music or the masked guests, it's dazzling. Moonlight slips in from the tall windows, brushing over the 357 mirrors until they glint like icy water. But the mirrors are no longer reflecting a room full of power. They're reflecting emptiness and you in it. You notice the faint smudges on the glass where candle smoke has dulled their shine, as if the palace itself has exhaled in exhaustion. Your footsteps echo sharply here, and the sound seems louder than it should. In the corner of your vision, one of the guards shifts his musket, leaning slightly against his shoulder. They're not the decorative guards of court ceremony anymore. These men have faces lined by weather eyes that stay fixed on doors, not dancers. At the far end of the hall, a door stands slightly ajar. You approach, curiosity tugging at you. Inside, the lighting is softer, warmer. A small group of attendants is gathered in an antechamber, speaking in low tones. On a nearby table lies a bundle of fabric, a dress, but not the kind you'd expect for a queen. No embroidered silk, no intricate lace, just plain white linen neatly folded. One of the attendants smooths the fabric with a hand that trembles ever so slightly. Somewhere nearby, a clock ticks loudly, its rhythm suddenly intrusive. You think about how Versailles once lived by its own elaborate schedule, rising rituals, formal meals, nightly entertainments. That clock is still ticking, but the rituals it once marked are gone. You pass under a low arch into another corridor. This one is narrower, the light dimmer. Here the scent of damp stone pushes through the lingering perfume. The tapestries along the walls are faded, their bright hunting scenes, now muted into shades of dust. You can almost feel the shift, the way you're leaving the showpiece halls behind and stepping into the veins of the palace. In one alcove, a narrow window is open to the night. You lean toward it. Outside, the gardens stretch into darkness, broken only by the occasional lantern swaying in the breeze. Farther out, beyond the ornate gates, you can see faint, flickering lights scattered like fireflies. Torches. And if you focus, the low, constant hum of a crowd. It's not here yet, but it's close enough to be felt. You move on deeper into the east wing. The corridors here are cooler, the air tinged with something metallic, like the smell of keys or old coins. You pass a set of double doors guarded by 2 soldiers. One glances at you, not unkindly, but with the detached watchfulness of someone who has been told exactly how far they're allowed to care. And there, down the final stretch, you see it, the door to her private apartments. Once this was a threshold only the most favored courtiers crossed, eager to watch her dress, to glimpse her morning toilette, to be part of the intricate theater of monarchy. Now it's closed. Only the faintest glow of candlelight spills through the crack beneath it. The corridor behind you has gone quiet. Even the soft footfalls you thought you heard earlier have stopped. You stand there, hand hovering over the cool brass of the doorknob, knowing that beyond it the last hours of a queen's life are already ticking away. The door gives way with a soft, almost reluctant sound, as if the hinges themselves understand the weight of what they're allowing. You step inside, and the first thing you notice is how small the space feels. Not small in actual dimensions, this is Versailles after all, but small in spirit. The grand sweep of public rooms is gone. Here the walls seem closer, the ceiling lower, the air heavier. A pair of candles burn on a low writing desk near the window. Their flames wobble in the faint draft, seeping through the ill-fitted glass. The light they throw is gentle but unflattering, showing the room exactly as it is stripped back, functional, not the lavish nest of silk and gold you might imagine for a queen. Marie Antoinette sits at that desk, her back straight, despite the fatigue that must be weighing on her. Her gown tonight is unremarkable, a pale, well-worn muslin simple enough to pass for something a merchant's wife might wear. It's a far cry from the elaborate court dresses she once floated through the hall of mirrors in. The kind with panniers so wide they could block a doorway. Those gowns are gone now, locked away or confiscated. On the desk before her, there's a small stack of personal belongings, a miniature portrait in an oval frame, a worn prayer book, a neatly folded handkerchief. Each item has been placed with deliberate care, as though their arrangement might grant some control over the hours ahead. You notice her hand resting lightly on the prayer book, her fingers tapping against its cover in a rhythm only she understands. In the far corner, an attendant kneels beside an open trunk. She's folding garments with mechanical precision, plain underlinen, a shawl, a few neatly bundled ribbons. The way she moves makes it clear she's been instructed not to linger, not to speak unless spoken to. The air between her and the queen is thick with unspoken things. You move closer to the writing desk, careful not to disturb the papers spread there. One is a letter already half filled in her unmistakable hand. Tight, neat lines, the ink just dry. Historians still argue whether this is the famous final letter she wrote to her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth. Some claim it's merely a draft, others that it never left the room at all. The truth is tangled in the same web as much of her life, half fact, half myth, and entirely at the mercy of who tells it. She pauses in her writing, dipping the quill again. The scratching sound is loud in the otherwise quiet room. Every so often she glances toward the window, though the shutters are closed against the night. You suspect she's not looking for anything in particular, just reaching for a piece of the world beyond these walls. A small table near the bed, holds the remains of a modest meal, a half-eaten roll, a piece of cheese, and a pewter cup of water. Versailles has never been known for its restraint in food, but here even the bread feels heavy, as if its purpose is not nourishment, but merely to keep the body going a few more hours. You catch a glimpse of something out of place, a single silk ribbon, bright blue, tied neatly around the stem of the pewter cup. It's not decorative in the usual court sense. It looks almost like a private gesture, a reminder of something only she understands. Maybe a memory. Maybe a promise she made to herself long ago. From the adjoining room, the low creak of floorboards announces another presence. A guard appears in the doorway, tall and lean, his tricolor cockade pinned sharply to his hat. His expression is flat, but his eyes linger on the Queen a fraction longer than they need to. It's not affection exactly, more the look of someone who knows they're witnessing something history will remember even if no one remembers him. The Queen doesn't flinch under his gaze. She simply sets down the quill, presses the letter flat, and folds it in one slow, deliberate motion. The sealing wax waits beside her, and she works it without haste, letting each movement become its own quiet ritual. When she finally places the sealed letter on the edge of the desk, she doesn't look at it again. In the stillness that follows, you become acutely aware of the sounds that filter in from beyond the palace, the distant murmur of a crowd, the occasional sharp cry, the faint clatter of hooves over cobblestones. Paris is close enough to be heard, and that closeness feels like pressure against the glass of this room. The attendant rises from the trunk, her arms full of folded linen. She hesitates as she passes the Queen, as if expecting an order or a question, but none comes. Instead, Marie Antoinette reaches for the prayer book, opening it to a page that has been marked so often the edges are frayed. She begins to read silently, her lips moving just enough to shape the words without sound. You find yourself drifting toward the window. The shutters are drawn, but through a narrow gap between them, you can see a sliver of the gardens, just a faint suggestion of trees against a darker sky. A single lantern glows near the orangerie, its light swinging in the wind like a heartbeat. When you turn back, the Queen has moved from the desk to the bed, sitting on its edge with both hands folded in her lap. There's no crown here, no throne, but she holds herself as if the weight of both is still on her shoulders. She looks for a fleeting moment, less like a condemned prisoner and more like someone hosting a quiet final audience with herself. The guard shifts in the doorway, clearing his throat softly, a reminder that time is moving forward whether she's ready or not. She meets his gaze, nods once, and then looks away, her attention returning to the folded letter on the desk. You wonder if she's thinking of who will read it, or if she already knows they never will. The room feels smaller still now, the candlelight warmer but somehow dimmer. Every object, every gesture seems to be gathering into itself, like the final inhale before a long, inevitable silence. She stands, and the change in her height alone shifts the entire energy of the room. The muslin skirt falls into place with a whisper, the faint sound of fabric brushing fabric. You follow her gaze to the wardrobe in the corner, a tall, austere piece of furniture, its carved doors worn pale in places where hands have touched them over the years. She crosses the room without hurry, pauses for a heartbeat before opening it, and then swings the doors wide. Inside, there's no riot of color, no silks exploding like confetti, no feathered hats or gowns that need two women to carry the train. Instead, there are just a few garments, each one practical, each one ready for the next day's inevitabilities. A neatly folded chemise, a plain wool shawl, a pair of gloves that have seen better winters. It's strange in a way to see the Queen of France reduced to this modest collection. For years, fashion was her weapon, and her shield, her language, and her armor. She used dresses the way others used decrees, commanding attention, controlling narratives, making herself impossible to ignore. Historians still argue whether her notorious spending habits were personal indulgence or political strategy in an age when a queen's influence was measured in fabric and jewels. Either way, the game is over now, and the wardrobe reflects that. She reaches for the shawl, first the wool coarser than anything she would have worn in her youth. It catches slightly on her ring, and she pauses to work it free. The sound of the ring scraping against the fibers is tiny, but in the quiet of this room it feels amplified. She drapes the shawl over the back of a chair. She won't wear it until morning, but it needs to be ready. The attendant moves closer, carrying a shallow box lined with linen. Inside are the last of her personal effects deemed acceptable to keep: a small ivory comb, a ribbon of pale green, a rosary whose beads are worn smooth from years of touch. Each object is placed on the bed one by one, as if this too is part of a ceremony. Marie Antoinette picks up the comb, running her fingers along the carved handle. For a moment, you see the faintest flicker of a smile, not joy, but recognition, like meeting an old friend. She sets it down and moves to the small vanity table against the wall. The mirror there is cloudy at the edges, its silver backing mottled with age. When she sits, her reflection wavers in the candlelight, the light catching on the fine lines at the corners of her eyes. She begins to unpin her hair. The first pin slides free with a soft metallic click, then another and another. Each one is placed carefully on the table in a neat little row. As the structure collapses, her hair falls in loose waves over her shoulders. Without the height of powdered coiffures, she looks younger in some ways, older in others. There's something almost hypnotic about the way she works, steady, deliberate, without any of the absent-minded fiddling most people do when getting ready for bed. This is purposeful, final. You realize you're watching a woman lay aside not just her hairpins, but her entire public face. The guard in the doorway shifts again, his boot squeaking faintly against the floor. His eyes slide away when hers meet his in the mirror. You can't tell if he's embarrassed to be witnessing something so intimate or if he's simply uncomfortable with the idea that queens are human enough to brush out their own hair. She sets the brush down after a few long, slow strokes, then reaches for the green ribbon on the bed. She gathers her hair loosely at the nape of her neck, ties it with the ribbon, and lets it fall forward over her shoulder. It's a simple, almost girlish gesture, and it hangs in the air for a moment before she turns away. The attendant approaches with a folded white cap. It's plain linen, the kind worn by women across France, from kitchen maids to merchants' wives. Seeing it here feels almost jarring, like a stage prop in the wrong play. Marie Antoinette takes it without hesitation, smoothing it over her hair, tucking in the loose strands. Her hands linger at the ties for a moment, adjusting them until they sit just so. You realize she's not doing this for vanity, it's about control. In a life where so much is being taken from her, even the smallest decisions matter. On the writing desk, the sealed letter still waits. She picks it up, walks to the guard, and offers it without a word. He takes it carefully, his eyes flicking down to the wax seal before tucking it into his coat. It's impossible to know whether it will ever be delivered. When she turns back, the attendant has begun laying out tomorrow's clothing on the chair. The plain chemise, the petticoat, the stockings all folded with meticulous care. A pair of black shoes sits neatly beneath them, their leather polished but scuffed at the toes. These are not shoes for a queen's promenade through the gardens. They are shoes for walking on uneven stone, for climbing stairs, for stepping onto a wooden platform in front of a crowd. The candles burn lower now, their flames drawing in, like they too are conserving themselves for what's ahead. The shadows on the walls have grown longer, softer. Outside, the murmur from Paris feels closer, though it could just be the night carrying sound differently. Marie Antoinette stands in the center of the room for a moment, her eyes moving over everything: the bed, the desk, the open wardrobe, the faint glow from the adjoining room. She seems to be committing it all to memory. Not the Versailles of her youth, but this Versailles, the pared-down, hushed, almost monastic version that will be her last. And then with a small nod to herself, she sits on the bed's edge again. The muslin fabric pools quietly around her, the candlelight catching in the folds. For the first time tonight, she lets out a long, slow breath, as if she's finally allowing herself to feel the weight she's been holding back all day. The air changes when you leave Versailles behind. It's subtle at first, the shift in sound, the scent of the air, but it builds with each step you take toward the carriage waiting in the shadows. There's no fanfare now, no liveried footmen holding doors, no glittering entourage. Just the heavy, unpolished presence of armed guards and the faint creak of leather straps as they adjust their grips on muskets. You climb into the carriage, the door closing with a dull thud that sounds final in a way you can't quite name. Inside, it smells faintly of damp wood and old wool, the scent of too many journeys made without joy. Marie Antoinette sits opposite you, flanked by 2 guards. She keeps her hands folded neatly in her lap, fingers pale against the dark fabric of her shawl. The candle lantern swaying overhead paints her face in brief flickering flashes here, a shadow under her eyes there, the pale gleam of her cheek. The wheels begin to turn, and Versailles slips away behind you. Through the small window, you can just make out the faint outline of the palace, its windows like scattered embers in the dark. You think about how, for decades, that building was the center of the world for her. A place where every gesture was calculated, every room a stage, every glance potentially political. Now it's shrinking into the night, and the stage is somewhere else entirely. The road to Paris is not quiet. Even before the city walls appear, you can hear it, the low, restless hum of thousands of voices. Some are speaking, some shouting, some laughing in that sharp, humorless way that comes from too much drink and too much certainty. The revolution has a sound, and it's nothing like the polite applause of a royal theater. Inside the carriage, the air is close. The guards don't speak, but their eyes shift toward the windows every so often. Outside, the fields give way to the edges of the city, rows of tightly packed houses, their upper windows dark, their lower ones spilling weak candlelight onto the street. You pass narrow alleys where cats slip between barrels past taverns, from which spill raucous voices and the smell of sour wine. Historians still argue whether she understood in this moment just how little of her old life remained. Some claim she'd known for years. Others believe she held on to hope until the very end, hope that some last-minute shift might pull her back into safety. Sitting across from her now, you can't tell which is true. Her face is composed, her eyes alert but not frantic. It's the expression of someone who knows she's being watched and refuses to give the watchers what they want. The carriage rattles over uneven cobblestones, the sound echoing in the hollow spaces between buildings. Once these streets might have erupted in cheers at the sight of her, the people pressing forward for a glimpse of their queen. Tonight, the faces you pass are unreadable, or worse, openly hostile. A boy of perhaps 12 pauses mid-step to stare as the carriage goes by. He doesn't wave. He doesn't smile. His eyes are sharp, following the lantern light glint off the guard's musket. As you near the heart of the city, the smell changes, less earth and wood smoke, more iron sweat, and the faint tang of something burning. You glance toward the river. The Seine reflects the torchlight in long, wavering ribbons. Boats rock against their moorings, their ropes creaking in the current. Somewhere across the water, a bell tolls, not the measured, ceremonious chime of a court clock, but a rough, uneven clang, as if rung by someone impatient for morning. The carriage slows, then stops. You look out and see why the crowd has grown too thick to move quickly through. Torches bob in the air like will-o'-the-wisps' faces flickering in and out of light. Some people shout her name, though not in welcome. Others jeer. A few just watch in silence, their expressions impossible to read in the shifting glow. The guards outside bark orders, trying to clear a path. The carriage moves forward again slowly, as if pushing through water. Marie Antoinette doesn't turn her head to look at the crowd directly, but her eyes move toward the sound. There's no flinch, no tightening around her mouth. You suspect she's learned by now that reactions are currency, and she's choosing not to spend any tonight. The journey feels longer than it should. Every corner turned, every pause, every shouted word from outside stretches the minutes until they feel like hours. And then finally, the carriage comes to a stop before a building that looks nothing like the palace you left behind. The conciergerie rises before you, its stone facade pale and severe in the lamplight. Once a royal palace itself, it's now the opposite, a place where the revolution sends its prisoners to wait for trial or for execution. The guards outside straighten as the carriage door opens. The night air rushes in cold and tinged with the smell of the river just beyond the quay. She steps down without assistance, her shoes striking the cobblestones with a sound that's sharper than it should be. The crowd here is smaller but more focused. A few voices call out, some mocking, some simply curious. The iron gates creak as they open, and you follow her inside. The courtyard is dimly lit, the shadows pooling deep against the high walls. The only sound is the steady drip of water somewhere out of sight. You pass through a heavy wooden door into the prison proper, the air turning damp and cool in an instant. The scent of wet stone is overwhelming, mixed with the faint bitterness of extinguished fires. Down a narrow corridor, the guard leads her to a cell. The key turns with a metallic groan, and the door swings inward. The room is bare except for a wooden bed frame with a thin mattress, a small table, and a chair. There's a single barred window, too high to see anything but a slice of night sky. She steps inside and looks around, once her gaze lingering on the table as if she's calculating whether there's enough light to write another letter. The door closes behind her with a finality that makes the candle in the hallway flicker. The conciergerie has claimed queens before, but it's never had one quite like her. And as you stand in the shadow of the door, you can't help but feel the walls themselves are leaning in, eager to learn the measure of the woman they now hold. The cell is smaller than the room you left behind at Versailles, but it carries a weight those gilded walls never could. The air is damp, almost clinging, and the scent of it stone iron and something faintly sour sinks into your lungs like a warning. Even the sound here is different. At Versailles, footsteps echoed and whispers traveled down corridors like they had somewhere to be. Here, everything is swallowed by the walls. If anyone speaks beyond them, the words vanish before they can reach you. She stands in the center of the cell for a moment, as if testing the space. Her shadow stretches across the uneven floor, breaking on the bed frame. It's not much more than a cot, a wooden frame, a mattress stuffed with straw that sighs under her weight when she sits. The single blanket is coarse, the color of river mud. There's a table beneath the small barred window, but window is generous. It's just a slit in the stone barely wide enough for the night air to slide through. From here, she can't see Paris, only a shard of the sky, a piece of cloud drifting past if the wind is right. The candle on the table wobbles in the faint draft, its light catching on the rusted iron of the bars. The guard who escorted her in stays in the doorway, shifting his weight, like he's already counting down the hours until his shift ends. Another guard appears, this one shorter, with a face that looks like it's been carved from the same stone as the walls. He carries a small wooden stool and sets it in the corner just inside the threshold. It's clear from the way he sits, musket resting loosely against his leg, that he's not here to guard the cell from the outside. He's here to make sure she never leaves it from the inside. It's an unusual arrangement. Historians still debate why she was kept under such constant surveillance. Some say it was for her own safety to prevent a mob from forcing their way in. Others insist it was to strip her of privacy entirely, to remind her that every breath now belonged to the Republic. Either way, it means she'll never have a moment alone again. She seems aware of this, though she doesn't acknowledge the man in the corner. Instead, she removes her shawl, folding it over the back of the chair at the table. The gesture is calm, deliberate, as if refusing to rush is the only rebellion she has left. Her movements are so measured, you almost don't notice the way her fingers tremble when she sits down. From a small pouch on the table, she pulls a handkerchief, a short length of twine, and a piece of paper folded into quarters. She smooths the paper flat and stares at it for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she sets it aside and reaches for the handkerchief, instead folding it into smaller and smaller squares until it fits neatly into her palm. Outside the cell, the prison shifts into its nighttime rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, a door slams shut, the sound echoing like a hammer blow. You hear a cough, muffled and wet, followed by the faint clink of metal on metal. The air feels cooler now, the kind of damp chill that seeps through layers of clothing and settles in your bones. She asks for water. Her voice is quiet but clear, and the guard rises without question. He disappears down the hall and returns with a tin cup half full. When he hands it to her, their eyes meet for just a second, long enough for something to pass between them. Not kindness exactly, but recognition. She takes a sip, sets the cup down, and leans back in her chair. The candlelight brushes against her face, revealing the fatigue etched into it. Her eyes drift toward the slit of a window, and for a moment she looks almost absent, as if she's standing somewhere far away, perhaps in the gardens at Trianon, or in a carriage on the road to Vienna. A sudden noise breaks the stillness, the scrape of a key turning in the outer door. Two men enter, both dressed in civilian clothes, but carrying themselves with the authority of officials. They speak briefly to the guard before approaching the table. One produces a small ledger and begins writing the scratch of his pen loud in the silence. They're here to inventory her possessions again, something that has already been done but will be repeated until there's nothing left to take. The process is mechanical. They note the shawl, the handkerchief, the comb, the ribbon. Each item is lifted, examined, set down again. The rosary lingers in the man's hand a fraction longer before he places it back on the table. When they finish, they nod to the guard and leave without another word. The echo of their footsteps fades into the corridor, replaced once more by the hush of the prison. The guard in the corner shifts the wood of his stool, creaking under his weight. He pulls a scrap of bread from his pocket and eats it slowly, his eyes fixed on the opposite wall. She ignores him, returning her attention to the folded paper on the table. This time she opens it. The handwriting is hers, tight controlled, but the words are too small for you to read from where you stand. She studies them for a long time, then folds the paper again and tucks it back into the pouch. The candle burns lower, its flame smaller now, bending toward the draft from the window. The light spills across the floor in a thin, trembling line. You can hear the faint drip of water from somewhere outside, steady as a clock. She stands, walks to the bed, and sits on its edge. The straw rustles beneath her. For the first time since arriving, she looks directly at the guard in the corner. He meets her gaze, and something unspoken passes between them again, not defiance, not surrender, but a simple acknowledgement that both of them are trapped here in their own ways. When she lies down, she doesn't pull the blanket over herself. Instead, she rests her hands on her stomach, her eyes open, fixed on the shadowed ceiling. The guard remains where he is, the musket across his knees, watching but not intruding. Outside, Paris keeps its own restless vigil. You can hear it faintly through the slit in the wall, the shuffle of footsteps on the quay, the occasional burst of laughter, the sharp ring of a hammer on metal from some late-night forge. All of it blends into a low hum, the sound of a city waiting for dawn. And in this small cold cell, under the unblinking eyes of the Republic, the Queen of France waits with it. The hours bleed together in the conciergerie. You stop noticing the difference between midnight and dawn, not because you're tired, but because the prison air flattens time until it feels like one long, unbroken moment. There's no clock in the cell, and the only light that changes is the thin strip of sky through the slit window, shifting from black to a dull gray when morning comes. Marie Antoinette is awake before the sky lightens. She sits at the small table, the candle burned down to a stub, its flame barely clinging to the wick. Her hair is tucked neatly under the linen cap she put on the night before the green ribbon now folded beside the comb. She has paper in front of her again, and the quill moves steadily in her hand. You lean closer. This isn't a letter to a court ally or a family member. It's something quieter. The lines are close together, each word pressed into the paper, as if to keep them from escaping. Historians still argue whether this was a prayer, a statement, or simply a record of her thoughts, for no one in particular. If it was meant for anyone, it's unclear if it ever left the cell. Every few minutes, she pauses the pen, hovering over the page, her eyes distant. You wonder if she's searching for the right words, or if she's afraid there aren't any. The guard in the corner shifts, stretching his legs. He hasn't spoken once since you entered this place, but you've caught him glancing at the writing. Not in a suspicious way, more like someone trying to imagine what it would be like to put their own life into sentences. When the candle finally gutters out, she sets the pen down. The cell dims, but she doesn't call for another. Instead, she folds the paper, carefully runs her thumb over the crease, and slips it into the pouch with the other folded sheet from the night before. A sound from the corridor interrupts the stillness, the soft scrape of leather boots and the rattle of keys. The outer door opens, and a young guard you haven't seen before steps in. His uniform is crisp, almost too new, and his posture carries that stiff, overcorrected pride of someone trying to prove themselves. He hands her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. She unties it, slowly revealing a heel of bread, a small wedge of cheese, and a pear with a bruise along one side. Breakfast. You've heard the rumors about the food here, thin soup, stale bread, little else. And for a moment, you're surprised at the fruit. Maybe it's a gesture of decency from someone in the kitchen, or maybe it's just a lucky delivery. She breaks the bread into 2 pieces, eats one, and wraps the other in the paper again. The cheese follows just a small bite, then she sets the rest aside. The pear she studies for a moment, before placing it gently on the table. You get the feeling it's not for eating, at least not yet. Outside, the day is stirring. You can hear the distant thud of carts on cobblestones, the calls of vendors setting up along the river, the flutter of pigeons shifting along the eaves. It's a different city from the one that roared with torches and shouts the night before. This Paris feels almost ordinary, almost. The younger guard lingers a moment too long, as if hoping for some exchange beyond the formalities of duty. But when she meets his eyes, she gives nothing away. He nods stiffly and retreats, the door closing behind him with a muted clang. Silence returns. She picks up the rosary, the beads sliding through her fingers in a slow, measured rhythm. It's not frantic, not even particularly solemn. It's simply steady like a heartbeat. You remember that she's been known to pray in long stretches, not just for herself, but for others. Even now, there's no theatrical piety here, no attempt to be seen as a martyr, just a quiet, private act. The guard in the corner watches her for a time, his musket still balanced across his knees. At one point, his eyes drift to the table where the pear sits, its skin catching the weak light from the window. It's strange how a piece of fruit can seem more vivid than the walls, the floor, even the woman sitting beside it. You think about how in some places something as simple as a pear can feel like wealth. The day moves in increments, noon marked only by the shift in the color of the light, through the slit window, the gray turning a little warmer. Somewhere beyond these walls, you hear a burst of laughter from the guards' quarters, followed by the thump of a chair tipping over. It's jarring, that sound normal life carrying on in a place like this. She doesn't react. She remains at the table, sometimes leaning forward to rest her chin on her hand, sometimes sitting straight, as if reminding herself not to slump. Every so often she touches the sealed letter from the night before, her fingers pressing against the wax. The hours stretch. The candle from earlier is gone and no one brings another. You realize how quickly darkness will fall again, how short the daylight is in this place. The guard shifts in his seat, the stool creaking. She glances toward him briefly, then back at the window. In the stillness, you imagine her thinking about her children, where they are now, what they've been told. The thought is almost unbearable, even for you as an observer. There's no trace of it on her face, but the way her hand's still on the table for a moment makes you wonder if she's fighting to keep the image from breaking her composure. By late afternoon, the faint hum of the city changes. It's subtle, but you can hear it, voices carrying differently, a kind of charged undercurrent replacing the earlier calm. Somewhere far off, a drumbeat begins slow and deliberate. It's not for her yet. Not tonight. But it's a reminder all the same. She notices it too. Her gaze shifts from the window to the floor, her hands folding neatly in her lap. The guard watches her in that same unreadable way. Neither speaks. The drumbeat fades after a while, swallowed by the city's other sounds. The light in the cell turns gold for just a moment before slipping back toward gray. Another day is ending, and the night will come just as it did before, swift, deep, and heavy. And still she waits. Night returns without ceremony. There's no sunset here, only the dimming of the light through the window until it becomes a flat shadow, and then nothing at all. The cell is a pocket of darkness, now broken only when the guard in the corner lights a single candle and sets it on the table. Its glow seems to push the walls farther away, but only just. The candlelight is a strange kind of company. It makes the iron bars gleam, faintly softens the harsh edges of the bed frame, and paints her face in a warm wash that doesn't belong in a prison. For a moment, you could almost believe this is an ordinary room, an ordinary night. But then the sounds seep back in the low groan of the prison, settling the occasional cough from some unseen cell, the drip of water from the corridor, and the illusion slips. Marie Antoinette sits at the table again, her shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders. The paper from earlier remains untouched. Instead, she's holding the rosary, the beads slipping through her fingers, with the same steady rhythm as before. You notice her lips moving quiet, deliberate, the words too soft to reach you. The guard on the stool watches without speaking. His presence is constant, but tonight there's something different about it. Maybe it's the way his shoulders have dropped, the way he looks less like a sentinel and more like someone waiting out a long, slow rain. From the hall beyond the cell, you hear footsteps, measured, deliberate. They pause outside the door, and then the small metal hatch opens with a squeak. A second guard peers in his eyes, flicking from her to the man on the stool. A brief exchange of words follows, low, unremarkable, and then the hatch closes again. The sound of the lock sliding back into place is sharper than it needs to be, like a punctuation mark in the middle of a sentence. You think about how strange it must be to live under this kind of constant observation. Versailles was full of eyes too, but those were different eyes that wanted to be noticed, to be part of the spectacle. These eyes are here to catch the smallest movement, the slightest deviation. Here, every gesture is inventory. She sets the rosary down and reaches for the pair she left untouched this morning. She studies it again, running her thumb over the bruised side, and then takes a small, deliberate bite. The sound is soft, but distinct in the quiet cell. The juice catches the candlelight for an instant before she swallows. She eats slowly, as though each piece deserves its own moment, until only the stem and seeds remain. These she wraps back in the paper, tying it with the same string it came with. The guard shifts his stool, scraping faintly against the stone. He glances at the bundle of paper and fruit remnants, then back at her, but says nothing. You hear something new outside now, a muffled swell of voices. It's not the sharp, jeering noise from the crowds the night before. This is lower, closer, more contained. You imagine small knots of people gathered in the streets near the quay, talking, waiting. The revolution may move in bursts, but its shadow never leaves. She seems to hear it too. Her head tilts slightly, her eyes fixed on the door as though she could see through it. But when the sound fades, she simply returns to her seat, smoothing her skirt as she sits. Historians still debate whether she knew in these moments that the next day or the day after would be her last. Some accounts claim she maintained hope of a pardon until the very end. Others suggest she had accepted her fate as soon as the carriage left Versailles. Sitting here now, you sense something closer to the second. There's no frantic energy in her movements, no restless pacing, just a quiet attentiveness, as though she's already begun to measure her life in the smallest possible details. The candle burns lower. Shadows gather in the corners, deepening until they seem almost solid. She leans forward, resting her elbows on the table, her face caught between the light and the dark. You wonder if she's thinking about the life she had before any of this, about gardens and masked balls, about children running down sunlit halls, about a time when the word prison meant the polite exile of a bored noblewoman, not this. The guard clears his throat quietly, and she looks over at him. For a moment, the two of them simply hold each other's gaze. It's not defiance and not recognition, but something quieter, an acknowledgement that they are both in different ways enduring the same night. From somewhere deep in the prison, a bell strikes the hour. It's not a rich, resonant chime like the ones at Versailles. This is a dull, metallic sound, almost hollow, but it travels all the same. The vibration lingers in the air, settling into the stone. She stands then, folding the shawl over the back of the chair. The guard doesn't move as she crosses to the bed. She sits, draws the coarse blanket over her lap, and then lies back slowly, her head settling onto the flat pillow. Her eyes remain open for a while, reflecting the last of the candlelight. The flame wavers, once, twice, then goes out. The darkness that follows is absolute. You can still hear the faint drip of water, the quiet breath of the guard, the far-off murmur of a city that is not sleeping. And in that blackness, you feel the strange truth of this place. It is possible to be utterly alone, even with another human being sitting only a few feet away. Somewhere above the cell, Paris breathes in the night. And here in the conciergerie's stone heart, she breathes with it. The night thins out slowly, the kind of darkness that doesn't break all at once, but fades by degrees, like an old curtain being drawn open a fraction at a time. You first notice it in the pale strip of sky above the barred slit, black softening to charcoal, then to a gray that is neither warm nor cold. The city is waking. Marie Antoinette is already sitting up, the blanket folded neatly at the end of the bed. The guard in the corner hasn't moved much during the night, but now he straightens, shifting the musket against his shoulder. He looks tired, though he tries not to show it. There's a stiffness to him that has nothing to do with duty and everything to do with long hours in the same chair. She doesn't speak, not to him, not to anyone. Instead, she moves to the table and takes up the folded paper from the day before. She doesn't open it, just holds it in both hands for a moment, her thumbs running along the edges as though memorizing the feel of it. Then she sets it down again, this time on top of the rosary. From outside, the sound of footsteps grows louder, boots on stone approaching in a deliberate rhythm. The key turns in the lock, the door swings open, and another guard enters, this one older and heavier in build. He carries a small tin tray, a crust of bread, a mug of thin coffee, and nothing else. He sets it on the table without a word. She thanks him quietly, and he gives a slight nod before retreating. The younger guard's eyes flicker to the tray, then back to the door. The coffee smells bitter, almost burnt, but she takes a sip without hesitation, setting the mug down with care so it doesn't clink against the tin. The bread she doesn't touch right away. Instead, she tears a small piece from the crust and leaves it on the edge of the tray. You get the feeling she's rationing, not because there's so little, but because this is one of the few acts she can still control. The sounds of the prison are different this morning. There's more movement, doors opening and closing, muffled voices exchanging short orders. A faint hum of activity runs under it, all the kind of low, purposeful energy that precedes something significant. The guards don't say anything, but their posture is different now, straighter, more deliberate. She notices it too. Her gaze follows the sound toward the hall, then lingers on the guard in the corner. He doesn't return the look, instead, adjusting the strap of his musket and focusing on some fixed point near the floor. Historians still argue whether she guessed what was coming at this point, or whether the official word had not yet been given. Some accounts suggest she was informed early in the day. Others claim she was left to deduce it from the atmosphere alone. Watching her now, you can't be sure which is true. There's no dramatic startle, no collapse into visible despair, just a tightening around her eyes so slight you could miss it if you blinked. She takes another sip of the coffee, finishes the small piece of bread, and folds her hands in her lap. The tray remains on the table, half untouched. Outside the window, Paris is fully awake now. You can hear the sharp calls of vendors, the rumble of carts over cobblestone, the faint chiming of church bells marking the hour. But beneath it all, there's still that low undercurrent, quieter than a mob, but heavier than ordinary life. The city is holding its breath. The older guard returns this time with a small bundle of folded linen. He sets it on the bed and steps back. She rises, unties the shawl from her shoulders, and lays it neatly on the chair before opening the bundle. Inside is the plain white chemise, the petticoat, and the black shoes you saw at Versailles. There's also a fresh linen cap, its ties crisp and stiff. She touches each piece with care, running her fingers along the seams, as though inspecting their honesty. Then she folds them again, places them back on the bed, and sits beside them. Her hands rest on the fabric for a moment, her thumbs stroking the texture in small, unconscious motions. From the corridor you hear a voice, clearer now, closer, speaking in an official tone. The words are too muffled to make out completely, but the cadence is unmistakable, a formal reading, the kind that comes before orders are carried out. The sound moves past the cell and fades. The younger guard glances at her, then quick but deliberate. She meets his eyes and holds them for a second, before looking back at the bed. There's no trace of panic in her expression, but there's a finality in her posture now, a stillness that feels like she's bracing herself against the weight of what's about to come. The candle from the night before hasn't been relit, and the light in the cell is purely from the slit window now. It's enough to cast her shadow on the opposite wall, slender, slightly bent at the shoulders, framed by the curve of the iron bars. The guards don't rush her. There's no barking of orders, no rough handling. Time moves slowly here, even now. She sits with her hands on the folded clothing until the older guard finally clears his throat, a quiet signal, but unmistakable. She nods, once rises, and carries the bundle to the chair. Her movements are calm, deliberate, almost ceremonial. You realize that in a place where everything is taken from her, this how she spends these final hours is hers to decide. She begins to untie the linen cap, the ends slipping soundlessly through her fingers. The green ribbon from the day before remains on the table, neatly coiled, its color catching the light one last time. Somewhere far off, muffled by stone and distance, a single drumbeat begins. Slow, steady, deliberate. The guards don't look at each other. They don't need to. Everyone in this room knows exactly what it means. The drumbeat doesn't stop. It comes at long, even intervals so steady, it could almost be the rhythm of a heartbeat if a heartbeat were made of wood and rope and finality. You feel it in the floor, through the soles of your shoes, a low vibration that seeps into the cell like damp air. Marie Antoinette stands beside the chair, her hands resting lightly on the folded linen garments. She waits until the next beat of the drum before she begins to dress, as though letting each strike mark the pace. First, she removes the shawl from her shoulders, folds it neatly, and places it on the bed. The coarse wool holds its shape even after she sets it down. Next, she slips the muslin gown over her head, the fabric whispering against itself as it falls away. The white chemise from the bundle is drawn over her body, its linen cool to the touch. The guards avert their eyes, not out of courtesy in the Versailles sense, but in the awkward recognition that this moment, stripped of all ceremony, is still deeply human. The guard in the corner lowers his gaze to the floor, and the older one finds something very interesting to inspect on the latch of the door. She pulls the petticoat into place, the fabric settling in soft folds around her ankles, and then bends to step into the black shoes. They fit well enough, though the leather creaks with the sound of disuse. When she straightens, she adjusts the hem of the petticoat until it hangs evenly. Every movement is quiet, deliberate, without wasted motion. The fresh linen cap is last. She gathers her hair shorter now than it once was, its powdered glory long since gone, and tucks it under the cap. The ties are stiff, and she works them slowly, pulling each side until the bow sits flat against her chin. The gesture is almost maternal in its care, like a mother tying a child's bonnet before sending her out into the cold. Historians still argue about what she felt in this moment. Some believe she had already entered a state of resignation, her mind turned inward to prayer and memory. Others insist she was still watching, still measuring, still looking for any sign of reprieve. You watch her now and think maybe both are true. Her eyes are calm, but there's a searching quality to them, like someone cataloging every last detail for a reason even she may not fully understand. She moves back to the table, takes the folded paper and the sealed letter, and places them side by side. Her fingers linger on the letter for a moment, pressing lightly against the wax. Then she turns to the guard in the corner. "I would like these delivered," she says softly. It's not a plea, not a demand, just a statement of intent. The guard meets her gaze for the briefest moment before looking away. He doesn't answer, but he steps forward and picks them up, tucking them inside his coat. Whether they will ever reach their destination is a question for another lifetime. From the hall, the sound of boots approaches again. 2 more guards appear in the doorway, these in full uniform tricolor cockades fixed to their hats, bayonets gleaming faintly in the morning light that now filters into the corridor. The older guard nods once, a silent acknowledgement, and steps aside. The man in the corner rises from his stool, musket in hand. She knows it's time. There's no need for anyone to say the words. The pear core from the night before still sits wrapped in paper on the edge of the table. She notices it as she pauses, and picks it up. Without unwrapping it, she places it gently on the bed as though leaving behind a token no one else will understand. They step into the corridor. The air cooler here, the scent of damp stone sharper. The narrow passage opens into the larger hall where more soldiers wait, their posture stiff and eyes fixed straight ahead. The drumbeat grows louder, echoing off the vaulted ceilings, its rhythm now a constant presence in your chest. The conciergerie is waking in full. Now doors creak open, voices murmur, keys jangle. But the noise is subdued, almost respectful. Even in the revolution's most fervent moments, There is an instinct to lower the volume when walking in the presence of someone about to die. She walks with her head held high, her steps, even her shoulders straight, despite the chill in the air. You think of how many ceremonial walks she once made in Versailles, processions to the chapel, entrances into the opera, strolls through the hall of mirrors, each one rehearsed, each one an exercise in spectacle. This walk is nothing like those. There's no court to impress, no rivals to outshine. But somehow the composure is the same. They lead her through the main courtyard, where the light falls hard and bright between the high stone walls. She squints slightly, but doesn't slow her pace. In one corner, a group of women prisoners huddle together, their eyes following her until she disappears through the archway. From here, it's a short distance to the waiting cart. The smell of the river drifts in the Seine, moving dark and wide just beyond the quay. Its surface catches the light in broken shards, the same water that's reflected the crowns of kings and now reflects the tricolor banners flapping in the wind. The cart is simple, its wooden frame worn smooth by years of use. 2 wheels, a flatbed, no seat. She will stand for the ride. The executioner is there, his red coat unmistakable, his expression impassive. He gestures to the cart, and she steps up without assistance. The wood creaks under her weight, and the smell of sawdust rises faintly into the air. The drumbeat doesn't falter, neither does she. Around you, the crowd is gathering. They press close to the barricades, faces eager, angry, curious. Some shout her name, mocking, spitting it like an accusation. Others simply watch, their eyes moving over her, like she's already part of the past. She doesn't look at them directly. Her gaze stays level somewhere above their heads, as if the horizon itself were the only thing left worth seeing. The driver climbs onto the front of the cart, takes the reins, and clicks his tongue. The horse moves forward, and the cart begins its slow roll through the streets of Paris, toward the Place de la Révolution. Every hoofbeat, every turn of the wheels, every strike of the drum pulls her farther from the palace she once called home and closer to the wooden platform that waits for her in the square. And still she does not bow her head. The cart moves at the deliberate, almost cruel pace that processions like this always seem to keep. It is not slow enough to shorten the time between now and the scaffold, nor fast enough to spare the crowd a good look. The route winds through the heart of Paris, the city rising up around you in stone and sound. The air is damp and carries the scent of the river for the first few streets, but that soon gives way to something sharper. The heat of bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, the tang of unwashed wool, the faint smoke from cooking fires still smoldering in the alleys. Above it all, the steady drumbeat continues slow and relentless, as if it has no destination except to mark each second until the last. Marie Antoinette stands in the cart, without leaning on anything. Her hands are bound loosely in front of her, practical restraint rather than humiliation, and she keeps them still, fingers laced. Her face is pale but not strained. Her eyes move slowly across the building's rooftops and the shifting sea of faces, as if she is memorizing the city in these final hours. The crowd is thickest near the markets. Stalls have been pushed aside or abandoned entirely to make room for the human tide. Some people jeer, their voices sharp and brimming with decades of resentment. You hear shouts about bread, about diamonds, about Austria. Others call out the names of her children, some in mockery, some in something that might almost be pity. A few voices are quiet, watching, not participating, but their silence doesn't shield her from the weight of their eyes. Historians still argue about whether she spoke during this ride. Revolutionary pamphlets claimed she exchanged barbed words with bystanders. Royalist accounts insist she maintained dignified silence. From where you stand, it's clear she chooses her moments carefully. At one corner, when a woman pushes forward and shouts something about the famine, Marie Antoinette's gaze shifts to her briefly. She doesn't reply, but she doesn't look away either. And in that pause, something unspoken passes between them, a recognition of pain that neither would have admitted in any other life. The cart rattles over a patch of uneven cobblestone, jolting her slightly, but she steadies herself without breaking the stillness of her posture. The executioner stands beside her, his expression as impassive as it was in the prison courtyard. The streets widen as you approach the Rue Saint-Honoré, and here the noise grows. The balconies above are crowded with onlookers leaning over the rails, their clothes flapping in the autumn breeze. Someone throws a scrap of paper down into the street. It lands near the cart and skitters across the stones before catching on a wheel. She doesn't look down to see what it says. You pass a church, its bells silent. The building's heavy doors are shut tight, its facade gray in the morning light. The absence of sound here is almost as striking as the noise everywhere else. The crowd's jeers soften for a moment in this stretch, replaced by murmurs and the faint creak of wooden shutters opening for a better view. She shifts her gaze upward now and again, catching glimpses of the sky between the buildings. It's not a bright day, more the pale flat light that comes before rain, but you get the sense she's storing it away all the same. At one point, a gust of wind lifts the edge of her linen cap, and she raises her bound hands just enough to smooth it back into place. Near Les Halles, the market smells are stronger fish onions, damp straw. Vendors stand at the edges of the road baskets at their feet, their eyes following the cart. Some cross themselves when they think no one is looking. Others raise their voices to call out old grievances, their words folding into the steady rhythm of the drum. A child perched on a man's shoulders points toward her and asks something in a small voice. The man doesn't answer, his eyes fixed on the cart in a way that suggests he doesn't want to remember this moment, even as he refuses to look away from it. The ride is long enough that you begin to feel the geography of Paris in your bones, the turns, the inclines, the shifting scents and sounds. The cart creaks underfoot, and every so often the horse snorts, its breath clouding in the cool air. As you turn onto the final stretch toward the Place de la Révolution, the space opens up. Here the crowd is densest, yet rows upon rows of people packed shoulder to shoulder, the outer edges pressed against the wooden barriers erected to contain them. The scaffold is visible now, stark against the pale sky, a tall wooden frame, the angled glint of the blade catching the light. If she sees it, she doesn't flinch. Her eyes move over it quickly, and then back to the horizon beyond. The drumbeat is louder here, its sound bouncing off the open square. The cart stops short of the platform. The executioner steps down first, then turns to offer her his arm. She hesitates only long enough to adjust her footing before stepping onto the cobblestones. The air here is cooler, the wind carrying the scent of wet wood and iron. She walks toward the steps without being pushed, her pace steady. Each board of the scaffold groans underfoot as she climbs. The square has gone quieter now, not silent, but hushed, the kind of collective intake of breath that comes just before the inevitable. At the top, she turns not to address the crowd, as a queen once might, but to look briefly back toward the streets she came from. You can't tell if she's looking for something in particular, or if it's simply the human instinct to take one last look. The executioner steps forward to position her. The rope for her hands is untied, replaced with a swift binding at her neck and ankles. She doesn't resist. When he moves to guide her toward the plank, she takes the steps herself, as though unwilling to be led in these final moments. Some witnesses would later claim she tripped, that her foot caught on the executioner's shoe, and that she apologized to him, a small reflex of etiquette surviving in the most unlikely place. Others insist this never happened, a royalist fiction to soften the edges of the scene. Historians still debate which version is true. The crowd waits. The drumbeat stops, and in that brief pause, Paris itself seems to lean in. The pause stretches long enough for you to notice everything. The creak of the scaffold's timbers under her weight, the faint whine of the ropes swaying in the breeze. The uneven breathing of the people in the first row of the crowd, some leaning forward, others holding themselves back, as if afraid of being too close to this moment. Marie Antoinette stands at the center of the platform, her body framed by the tall, angular shape of the guillotine. The wood is darkened in places, whether from weather or use, you can't quite tell. The blade above glints coldly in the pale morning light, its edge catching a sliver of the sky. She looks forward, not down at the mechanism, not at the executioner, and not at the crowd directly. Her face is calm in a way that almost feels unreal. It's not defiance exactly, nor resignation. It's a strange, quiet certainty, as if she stepped outside of herself to stand and watch alongside you. The executioner gestures for her to move toward the plank. She obeys without hesitation, the linen of her chemise shifting with each step. When she reaches him, she turns slightly, her bound hands brushing the edge of his coat. If the story of her apology is true, this is the moment it happens. A quick, almost instinctive murmur, "Pardon me, monsieur. I did not mean to do it." Whether she actually spoke those words, or whether they were later imagined by those who wanted to see her leave the world with grace, you can't tell. She lies down on the board, her cheek pressing briefly against the cool wood. The executioner and his assistants move quickly, securing the head and neck into position, fastening the final restraints. The wooden ropes shift with practiced efficiency, the sounds of their work swallowed by the quiet of the square. From the crowd, a lone voice calls out her name, not with hate, not with pity, but as if simply confirming that she is still there. It is quickly absorbed by the murmur of the others, which rises and falls like wind through bare branches. The air feels heavy now, as if even the clouds have slowed their drift overhead. You're aware of every small sound, the rustle of fabric, the faint jingle of the executioner's tools, the steady exhale of the horse still harnessed to the cart below. She closes her eyes. Not tightly, not in fear, just the natural closing of a door. Historians still argue over her last thoughts. Did she see her children's faces? The gardens at Petit Trianon? The ballrooms at Versailles glittering with candlelight? Or did she see nothing at all, focusing instead on the cool weight of the morning air, the texture of the wood beneath her cheek, the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat? The executioner raises his hand, a small signal to the man at the lever. The blade releases with a mechanical finality, fast, precise, without hesitation. There's no drawn-out spectacle, no theatrical flourish. The sound is sharp, followed by an intake of breath from the crowd that ripples outward like a wave breaking against stone. It's over in an instant, but the silence that follows feels longer than the act itself. The assistants move with brisk efficiency, removing what must be removed, holding what must be held. The crowd's murmur swells again, louder now, full of voices jostling to be heard, some triumphant, some stunned, some already telling the story, as they will later remember it. And you stand there feeling the way history seems to contract around this point, pulling everything before it into a single thread, and letting everything after trail away into the distance. The executioner steps back. The scaffold empty now, except for the plank and the ropes, looks strangely small. The sky above remains pale, flat, indifferent. The crowd begins to move slowly at first, then with more purpose. People drift toward the edges of the square, toward the markets, toward their homes. Some linger talking in low voices. Others leave without looking back, already folding the memory of this morning into the larger story of the revolution. The guards dismantle the barricades, their boots clattering on the wooden boards. The cart is still there, waiting to be wheeled away. The horse shakes its mane, indifferent to the fact that it will not carry her back to Versailles. The drumbeat does not return. You remain a moment longer, your eyes on the scaffold. The details are already fading, her posture, the way the linen cap tied neatly under her chin, the faint lift of wind in her skirt. You realize that for all the arguments, all the pamphlets, all the witnesses who will claim to know what happened, No one will remember it exactly as it was. Not even you. The square empties. The blade reset in its frame catches the light once more before the clouds slide over it. The morning moves on, and now the square grows quieter. The footsteps fade. The voices dissolve into the distance. Even the air seems to lose its sharpness, softening as it drifts through the emptying space. The scaffold is just wood again. The cobblestones are just stone. The city exhales. You find yourself walking away slowly, letting each step take you farther from the echo of the drum, from the press of the crowd, from the weight of the moment. The streets beyond the square are calmer. A shutter creaks open. Somewhere bread is baking. Somewhere else a child is laughing too far to know why, but close enough to hear that it's real. The sky, pale and unremarkable, stretches overhead as though it has never seen the inside of a prison or the edge of a blade. You pass the river, its surface shifting gently in the light, carrying away reflections without asking where they've been. In your mind, the images settle. The shawl folded neatly on the chair, the letter sealed in wax, the green ribbon coiled like a final signature, the walk through the streets, the last glance toward the horizon. They drift together not in sharp detail, but in the soft blur that comes when you're ready to rest. And as you move farther into the quiet, you can feel the day loosening around you, slower, gentler the edges of each moment, softening until they begin to fade. The city will remember her in its own way. You will remember her in yours. And for tonight, that is enough.